Hello, I'm Pastor Quincy with Cuyahoga Falls Church of the Nazarene, here to talk to you about Season 4, Episode 7 of The Chosen. Chosen is a free TV series about the life of Jesus. You can find it on the Chosen app or any of your favorite streaming services. There's going to be 7 seasons, so Season 5 is coming out this coming spring 2025. So you want to make sure that you catch up, and these are some video study guides to help you understand the background of the episodes and what's going on. So Episode 7 of Season 4, The Last Sign, opens with a flash forward, something The Chosen has done one other time. And here we have Matthew being smuggled in under some hay in a wagon. He gets out, makes his way through the desert to a cave, guarded by an aggressive young Christian with a bow and arrow, and where he finds Mary Magdalene, and the two of them begin to have a meaningful discussion based around Matthew having brought Mary Magdalene a copy of the gospel that he's written, which he's finally finished, and sharing the news that little James has been martyred. So little James is martyred in Egypt. Matthew shares one of those church traditions that took place is out there. And here we have an interesting reference that little James' family has ended up with Nympha, a church leader in Colossae. Reminder that women led churches in these days, and you can find that evidence in Colossians 4:15, which mentions Nympha. So that's pretty neat. The two of them have this conversation, and they continue to go back and forth as Matthew says that he wants to hear what Mary has written for her own self. And then we get to kind of be led along to say, well, when are we going to come back to that as we head into the meat of the episode? We open with Simon the Zealot making some walking staffs for the people of the disciples who were injured in the attack after Jesus' sermon in Jerusalem. James, little James as they call him, and big James both getting staffs. And then we have people walking on the journey having conversations. Thomas and John having conversation. Thomas having a very fatalistic view of things. If it is God's will for us to die when we go back to Jerusalem because Jesus wants to see what's going on with Lazarus who has died. If I die like Lazarus, then I won't have to suffer anymore. And John lightly reprimanding him, reminding him that the scriptures tell us, referencing Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, that we need to choose life, only to be dismissed by Thomas and his kind of despair of everything that's gone on because Thomas has lost his beloved fiancée, Rama, who also followed Jesus. Peter and James, big James, have a conversation about their concern over Jesus might possibly be about to raise Lazarus from the dead as he raised Jairus' daughter, and how will Thomas process that when Jesus did not raise Rama from the dead? Good conversation for them to be thinking about. We have Judas Iscariot eventually, and Nathanael talking about what it was like before Jesus arrived, and is something wrong? I loved how they had Judas say, if Jesus is the Messiah, shouldn't we be doing more winning and not losing? And Nathanael saying, well, only Jesus knows what true glory, what true winning looks like. Beautiful phrasing, and I think there's a lot of truth to what the show is unpacking about what Judas expected from Jesus. Why do we keep losing? Why are people dying? Why is there so much suffering and pain and not recognition of who Jesus is, and no attempts to really display his power? When Jesus' glory, as we are told in the scriptures and examples like Hebrews chapter 12, his glory is to lay down his life for us. His glory is the suffering that he endures on our behalf. His glory is to bring us life through the redemption of our suffering. And of course we have little James and Mary struggling with their own understanding of the trials that they have to go through. Little James recommending that Mary learn Psalm 13, How long, O Lord? The song of crying out to God, ending with this note of hope. And they're asking, if Jesus wakes Lazarus, won't it just raise even bigger questions about why he doesn't do other things? Is this what we expect? And does it really matter what we expected? So then, of course, we go to the home of Lazarus who has died. His sisters, Mary and Martha, are there. Jesus' mother is there. And the father of Yusuf, probably Joseph of Arimathea, if we're putting some pieces together, his father's there because he was a partner of Lazarus. There's a man who's handled Lazarus' finances who's saying that sisters will be okay. There's money in a safe if they need it right away. They don't want to hear that. They've heard that Jesus and the disciples are around the corner, and then Martha goes to Jesus. And right now, we have unpacked before us John 11:17 through 44. So you really want to go and look at that passage as you experience the rest of this episode. Jesus and everyone around him are so emotionally worked up in this scene. And it's perfect because if you read John 11 and you read it a few times, you will note that there is an air of emotional tension, and people are upset when Jesus is upset in the passage. It talks about him as if he's like snorting like a horse going into battle. Like Jesus is angry at what death has done to his people, and everyone around him, they're just so tense about what's going on. And the show has found a way to bring all that tension home to viewers because of Rhema's death, because of the unsure nature of the disciples who are following Jesus, and because we see these women wondering why Jesus didn't come when he originally was called. Peter knows, and we get this little flashback, Peter knows that Jesus waited on purpose. And of course we have this beautiful moment of Jesus weeping, Jesus experiencing the grief and the suffering that we know that human beings experience and sharing that with us. Now, Jesus goes to the tomb, raises Lazarus from the dead. So exciting to see this scene unpacked before our eyes and all of these tensions brought to bear. I love how they present what is in the passage about there's a stench here. He's been dead for 4 days. Decomposing happens quickly in the environment that these disciples are living in. Everyone knows he's dead. When they open the tomb, they know he's dead, and they know that now he's alive. No one can deny it. Most interesting thing about this episode is that we get several shots of a strange hooded man in the crowd, and we have no idea who this person is. I've seen some people speculate that it may be Paul, maybe Saul of Tarsus is being introduced to us. It's possible. I think it probably makes most sense for this to be the introduction of the show to Satan. Maybe Satan is kind of taking a form and looking at what's going on. There's certainly an air of menace as he leaves the scene, as he's watching everyone. We don't recognize his face, but he is watching what's going on. There's that rattlesnake sound as he leaves. And then also as we think about the very end of the episode and Mary talking about how darkness is not just the absence of light, there is something sinister and a power and a presence there. So that would make sense to me if that's who that is, but we'll have to see what is unpacked in the future. The show and the directors, the writers certainly wanted us to notice that that person was there. I appreciate that there is horror to this as Lazarus comes out. People are shrieking. Thomas is devastated. And you can imagine there are people all around Jesus who have seen their loved ones die and have not seen those loved ones come back to life, who would be asking those same questions. We don't see in Scripture, of course, that Thomas's fiance dies, but this all tracks with what we understand of how people would understand this. And Jesus brings Lazarus back to life. They're all reconciled, and then he's immediately confronted by the grief of his follower, Thomas. And all Jesus can say is, just stay with me. Just stay with me. Jesus is glad that a Sadducee's upset. He's trying to force the issue. And that, of course, makes Judas very happy. Judas expects this to be the conclusion of what he's wanted from Jesus the whole time. Jesus is finally going to force the issue and bring the power back to his people. And we have the scene of Jesus talking to Lazarus and the two of them really going into Isaiah 53. Jesus is frustrated his disciples don't understand, even though he's told them that he has to suffer and die. And he's angry at the religious leaders and their response to the presence of God being revealed right in front of their eyes. Lazarus knows that he's the Son of God and has to process this fact that he is also the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, the one who is going to take our suffering onto him. Then we have the scene of the disciples. They're upset. Thomas is done with it all. Judas is somewhat callously dismissive of Thomas, saying that this is what we've been waiting for. Jesus is now going to enforce his kingdom, begin his rule, start his army. Anyone who opposes him can be snuffed out, and everyone is pushing back against that from Thomas, saying that Jesus is inviting us to participate in whatever it is that he's going to do. And Simon the Zealot reminding Thomas, he threw away my dagger. He has a different plan than violence. Reminds me, at the beginning of the episode, I had some questions about why a Christian would be threatening another Christian with a bow and arrow. I suspect we're meant to understand that she wouldn't have actually shot the bow and arrow. She just wanted to do all she could to protect Mary Magdalene. Maybe a little over aggressive, not really what Mary wants. But we see a church of people that are following Jesus who know that they are not supposed to be taking up arms against their enemies, even if it's very tempting. And even if Judas said, well, that's what we need. And Judas here says, well, maybe Thomas isn't one of Jesus' true sheep. Maybe he's not really one that Jesus will say, no one can snatch them out of my hand. And the disciples say, well, maybe the devil has gotten to you, Thomas. What are you saying? Interestingly enough, because we know that the devil does go into Judas. And again, I do wonder if we're seeing reminded that that's going to happen and being prepared for that. Finally, after this conflict, after Jesus has heard his disciples breaking out over this, as we see the pain and suffering that all of his followers are experiencing at different levels, we have finally a flash forward to the Psalm of Mary, and Mary sharing with us and with Matthew from her heart, her not understanding the way that Jesus does things. Even after the resurrection, she doesn't understand why he lets his people experience so much suffering. But she prays to him in the middle of this. She believes that there is a point to all this. She quotes Psalm 139, verse 12, darkness is not dark to you. And as she gives us this psalm, we see Shammai, opposition leader to Jesus, hearing the news about Lazarus being raised from the grave. We see Mary beginning to get the money out of the safe because she's going to purchase a very important gift. All these pieces are moving towards this final moment, and then of Jesus' life on this earth. And then we are left with this note of unsurety as we end this episode. What does it all mean? What is Jesus requiring of us when we follow him? Where kind of places is he going to ask us to go that we're not prepared to go, but we can just stay with him because of our trust and our faith in him? And our faith in him, our receptivity to his activity at any cost, is what's going to get us through these hard times. I love that the show is willing to ask all these questions. I love that they brought all this tension into this sign that's such a beautiful sign. Probably the most amazing thing that Jesus did while on the earth is raising Lazarus from the dead. And yet if you watch this episode, you're left with a sense of unease, which is a very brave thing for the writers to do and a very true thing, because all of us live in this place of not understanding why Jesus allows the things that he allows, heals some, doesn't heal others. And we're invited into asking those questions and following him in faith, even when we don't understand. He'll bring us life out of death just when we don't think it's possible. We just need to trust.